Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News, and here are some of the top stories we've been following. Despite its promise to scale back attacks, Russia continues to shell residential and civilian areas in Ukraine. Plus, a local organization hopes to help Ukrainian refugees coming to Lethbridge. And it's back. For the first time since the pandemic, the Home and Garden Show sets up exhibits in Lethbridge.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks so much for joining us. The head of the Kyiv Regional Military Administration says Russia continues to shell residential areas and civilian infrastructure around the capital in the past 24 hours, despite its promise to scale back its attacks. The Russian military is now focused on the Donbas region in the eastern part of Ukraine, where Russian-backed separatists have fought Ukrainian forces since 2014. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov says he can't say there's been anything promising or any breakthroughs out of the latest talks with Ukraine. Ukraine set out a detailed framework for a peace deal Tuesday in Istanbul. It would see the country remain neutral, but its security would be guaranteed by a group of countries, including the U.S., Britain, France, Turkey, and Poland. 4 million Ukrainians are alleged to have fled to neighboring countries, while another estimated 6.5 million people are thought to be displaced inside the war-torn country. I spoke with one Ukrainian Canadian who's been in touch with her family and friends back in Ukraine, and some have chosen to stay put to help the vulnerable.
Many of them were able to get out, so they're refugees right now. Some of them are in Poland, some of them are in Germany right now. And some of them would like to come to Canada. Some decided to stay. And the reason they're staying is because this one cousin of mine, she was writing to me and she said, please don't judge us because we decided to stay. It's very difficult, but there's nobody else to help the elderly, to help the people with special needs.
You can catch that full interview with Anya Popham in the second half of our show. Canada's Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland, says the next federal budget will be released April 7th. It's expected to focus on spurring economic growth and to include the first steps of implementing new pharmacare and dental care programs.
Our government was re-elected on a commitment to grow our economy, make life more affordable, and to continue building a Canada where nobody gets left behind. That is exactly what we are doing, and that is what we're going to continue to do in the budget that I will present to this House on April 7th, 2022 at 4 p.m.
Indigenous delegates who toured the Vatican museums this week reflected after seeing a collection of Indigenous artifacts. Some of the collection has not been seen in decades or ever. Some delegates say it left them conflicted about who should have the objects.
Here we are in this 2022, and our history is being stored and shown in other countries where nobody understands. And I think those items, those artifacts reflect, those are ours.
A Roman Catholic priest who was in Canada from the early 1960s until he returned to France in 1993 is facing a new sexual assault charge. An arrest warrant was first issued in 1998 for Johannes Revoir, who faced at least 3 sexual abuse charges in 3 Nunavut communities. The charges were stayed partly because France was reluctant to extradite the priest. But just this week, the leader of the National Inuit Organization asked Pope Francis to intervene during a meeting at the Vatican.
The final point that we raised was in relation to the legacy of sexual abuse in the Church, and asked the Pope directly if he would intervene in a particular case against Johannes Revoir, who currently resides in France. And we asked that the Pope speak with Father Revoir directly and ask him to go to Canada to face the charges that he is up on in Canada. And if Father Revoir is not agreeable to that, if the Pope would do all that he could to work with the French government to ensure that either extradition can happen or that Father Revoir can be tried.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is visiting BC's Williams Lake First Nation today, one of the latest places to believe to have unmarked children's graves at the former residential school. The First Nations chief wants to talk to him about long-term funding for the community. Willie Sellers says his community and others that are searching for unmarked graves need financial support for their work as well as mental health support. He's also urging both the federal government and the Roman Catholic Church to provide complete records about the school. Afghan interpreters who helped the Canadian military are planning to hold a hunger strike tomorrow. They say the federal government lied to them about bringing family members to Canada and that people have been killed or interrogated by the Taliban waiting for paperwork to be processed. New Democrat MP Jenny Kwan says the government should treat families of Afghan interpreters the same as Ukrainian refugees and process their papers once they are safe in Canada. A local grassroots organization called Project Sunflower is hoping to help Ukrainian refugees who are coming to Lethbridge and southern Alberta as they flee the ongoing war with Russia. The group helps them obtain visas, secure safe passage, and obtain work permits once they arrive in Canada. Mark Woons, a member of the Project Sunflower, says the numbers keep growing for Ukrainian families that will be making their way to our country.
We've identified over 50 families so far. That's over 150 people. Not all of them will come here. They're looking, again, some want that job security, and some of them decide to go elsewhere for whatever reason. But many of them are excited about the opportunity to come to Lethbridge. We've already identified over 100 spots where people can stay. So we kind of track the maximum number that each family here can take. And so we're over 100 spots right now.
Project Sunflower is also looking for volunteers who can cook meals, give rides, or babysit for these families. The federal government hopes to cut greenhouse gas emissions by more than half in the next 8 years, with a target of reaching net zero emissions by 2050. BCN's Angela Stewart hears from an author who says everyone has to be on board for the plan to be successful in the end.
This is an important moment as people come together to drive our next steps on climate action.
Create jobs and keep the air clean. These are just some of the key points out of the federal government's new emissions reduction plan.
So we put down a clear track for where the sector needs to go. Emission cuts of a little over 30% compared to 2005, with a little over 40% emission cuts compared to where we are today.
Trudeau believes this new plan will help guide us in the right direction to be able to cut emissions from the oil and gas sector. Author of Carbon Capital and the Cloud, Jeffrey Can, says with the new plan, the government is also being faced with other challenges.
Energy security, the economic recoveries coming out of the pandemic and related issues, and of course, managing to a cleaner future climate environment.
Another aspect of the Fed's plan is to bring in mandatory ZEV sales targets by 20% by 2026.
And 60% of all new personal vehicles sold in Canada will be zero emission by 2030.
To be able to get an economic electric charge point local to where you are is going to be a very heavy lift.
Can says for us to reach the goal of cutting emissions by 2030, everybody has to be in the same playing field.
It takes time, and we're going to have to make some hard choices. And to date, our choices that we've taken as a society, as a country, are to continue on with the status quo.
For Bridge City News, I'm Angela Stewart.
Meanwhile, local reaction in Alberta has not been so favorable towards the Liberals' new climate plan. In an interview with correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson pointed out that it was a rare show of bipartisan support as both Rachel Notley and the UCP condemned the plan.
It is, and nothing creates unity in Alberta politics like the Prime Minister's government doing something. So that's what we saw on Tuesday. We had both the New Democrats and the United Conservatives sort of slamming this plan. Jason Nixon, who's the Environment Minister, came out and said that this plan is insane. It's a direct attack on the oil and gas sector. And Rachel Notley, took a similar path. She said this is fantasy and it's aspirational. It's not a roadmap to actually get this done.
You can catch the full interview with Tyler Dawson coming up after Business News. The flags were lowered at Lethbridge City Hall today in honor of the late Joyce Fairburn. The former journalist and Liberal senator was appointed to the Senate in 1984 and resigned from her seat in 2013 after being diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. In a statement, acting Mayor Rayco Dodick says he had the pleasure of attending many occasions with Senator Fairburn and always admired her dedication to public service. He goes on to say, quote, "She was a builder and a trailblazer, not just here in Lethbridge, but across the nation. She was always advocating for her country, her province, but even more so on behalf of Lethbridge citizens. Her numerous contributions will be felt forever in our community. We will miss her," end quote. Fairburn grew up in Lethbridge and has a middle school on Lethbridge's west side named after her. She was 82. The cause of death was not immediately known. Prominent Saskatchewan business owner and CPC leadership candidate Joseph Bourgault was in Lethbridge Tuesday touring Lethbridge Iron and to discuss how the federal carbon tax hurts low-income Canadian families and sends high-paying manufacturing jobs to countries like China and India.
And so I've argued in our boardroom and in our management room for years that we must keep as many jobs as possible in our country and not ship them to China. And the carbon taxes have only made that more difficult. And it's driven up inflation so that all Canadians, especially lower income Canadians, they can't afford to heat their homes and power their vehicles. And it's bankrupting our truckers as well, the carbon taxes. They can no longer make a profit. We were talking to these guys in Ottawa, and they're telling us this. So to me, eliminating the carbon taxes are essential because I believe there's other ways to reduce pollution.
Joseph Bourgault was recognized for the Saskatchewan Order of Merit in 2011. He says as the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, he would refocus the country's values on truth, freedom, and justice for all. A home invasion turned into a car theft Monday morning at a farmhouse near Clare's home. Members from the Fort Macleod, Clare's home, and Nanton RCMP responded after a suspect entered a house where a 20-year-old woman was home alone. Following a verbal interaction, the man fled the home, stealing a Cadillac that was parked in the yard. RCMP caught the suspect and took him into custody at a Nanton gas station. He was found to be in possession of drugs and drug paraphernalia. Alexander Harsony, 28, of no fixed address, faces charges of mischief, theft, and possession of cocaine. And in other news, if you're able to identify the man in these pictures, Lethbridge Police want to hear from you. Lethbridge Police Service says they're wanting the public's help in finding this man who they believe stole a donation box from the Scenic Drive Tim Hortons restaurant Tuesday afternoon. He allegedly also attempted to steal the donation box from the nearby Wendy's restaurant 15 minutes earlier. The box was subsequently located nearby, but with its contents emptied. The same man is believed to be responsible for both incidents. The Sterling Fire Department has a new toy to add to its ranks. Fighting wildfires will now be much easier for the volunteer-led department. As Michael Quinn reports, village staff say this is a huge win for Sterling.
The Sterling Fire Department has received a much-needed upgrade in the way it fights fires. The Structural Protection Unit trailer for wildfire prevention was provided by the fire equipment protection supplier, Flash Fire and Safety. On March 28th, the fire department provided a demo on the new trailer. The unit has the ability to protect up to 28 structures or provide a wetline fire break for a distance of almost a kilometer.
Basically, the trailer is equipped with like 6 Mark III pumps, high pressure pumps, so that we can push water to the sprinklers, with different hoses, different sprinkler heads, that we can put on roofs, eaves troughs, on the ground. We have a couple big water cannons that we can use like on a steep hill.
There are 30 volunteer firefighters that make up the Sterling Fire Department. Staff from Sterling say this new trailer is vital for the protection of the village and the surrounding communities it serves.
It seems to be that wildfires are becoming a more prevalent event. People in British Columbia and Alberta seem to be preparing for them annually, and to have this sort of resource in southern Alberta and made available to us we're quite excited about it.
The Sterling Fire Rescue Association is currently looking for sponsors to be able to purchase the trailer in the future instead of it being contracted out. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
After 2 years with one event canceled and one virtual, the Home and Garden Show is back in person at the Lethbridge and District Exhibition this week. Nathan Ryder went to the exhibition before the gates opened this morning and learned more about the event.
The gates are open, the exhibits are set up, and the excitement among vendors and organizers at the exhibition park is rising. For the first time since 2019, the Home and Garden Show will take place in person. The event was canceled in 2020 and took place virtually in 2021. This is the second event taking place at the exhibition since restrictions were lifted after Egg Expo earlier this month. Lethbridge and District Exhibition CEO Mike Workington says it's good to be back into normal events.
That we shook off any of the event dust that was there. And I heard this of a lot of businesses that as they re-entered after the closures, a lot of new staff, a lot of new vendors, a lot of people who had really forgotten how to come and be part of a trade show. 2020, we were all set up and ready to go, and the restrictions came into place, and we were shut down overnight. And so in 2021, we did do a virtual event which gave people the opportunity to interact with some of our traditional vendors, but we couldn't be happier to have everyone back on park.
For some business owners, it provides a chance to showcase their unique products. Jennifer McCarthy is the owner of Teacup Tiny Homes. She says the event is important for getting recognition for her business and not just from a local audience.
This is very important for Teacup. We have a lot of people that always want to see the tiny homes. So it's not necessarily a huge selling event for us, but it definitely builds awareness. So we have people, I believe, that are coming from all over Alberta, some in Saskatchewan and BC to come see the tiny homes this weekend.
The Home and Garden Show runs from Wednesday through Saturday, April 2nd. For Bridge City News, I'm Nathan Ryder.
Thank you, Nathan. Well, the Chinook Arch is coming up to a big milestone, marking 30 years of helping different municipalities in southwestern Alberta to offer excellent public library services. The system began back on April 1st in 1992 and is now featured in over 30 libraries across the province. An official with the Arch says the last 30 years have really transformed the local library systems.
Yeah, it's been quite the journey, but it's been. Yeah, it's and through a time of incredible change in public library services. You know, in 1992, the internet was not really a thing. You know, most of the libraries were still checking books in and out by hand, a lot of paper records and everything like that. So since then, we're now networked. Everybody's there's all the digital content and everything like that. And so libraries have really been able to adapt.
The Arch says they're looking forward to what the next 30 years brings. Well, a former Humboldt Broncos hockey player who was paralyzed from the chest down in the team's bus crash 4 years ago is receiving an upgrade on a spinal implant he received 3 years ago to help move his legs. Since receiving the implant, Ryan Strachnitsky of Airdrie, Alberta, has been able to stand on his own and take a few steps with a walker, and this week the device is being reprogrammed in Calgary. The upgrade was delayed because of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Sometimes when the stem's set to a certain level, I can feel it like kind of vibrating and clenching my body. So there's times where it's overpowering, and then there's times where I don't feel anything at all. So it's about finding that happy medium and what works best. This whole science world is insane. Like it's expanding every day, and there's new things coming out. So for them to come here and work on it, and something new to me and something kind of new to them as well. So it's pretty exciting. It's incredible. I mean, I've been able to keep my body healthy and my legs healthy as well. So for the chance to come for if I do walk in the future, I think it's going to be more successful than if I didn't have the treatment done. Yeah, I was supposed to go back to Thailand, but because of the pandemic, we weren't able to. So now that the pandemic's over and things are starting to start up again, they were lucky enough to come here.
Wonderful what technology can do. Well, it was a lovely sunny day in the Windy City today. We reached a high of 17 degrees, but could we be seeing showers or even flurries in the forecast Thursday? I will tell you right after the break. Keep it right here. Well, we had a gorgeous day in southern Alberta today. In fact, Brooks, Alberta, not too far from here, was the hotspot in Canada at 20 degrees. Lethbridge wasn't much below that at 17, so we reached higher than our high today, which was supposed to be 15. We got to 17. That's going to change, though. Starting tonight, we're looking at a 30% chance of showers or flurries, low of -1. Into tomorrow, also seeing a chance of showers or flurries. High winds, too, going up to 80 kilometers per hour today, up to 60 tomorrow. Chance of a thunderstorm tomorrow afternoon into Friday. We're getting back to the double digits, 10 degrees. 10 degrees also expected on Saturday, 13 the high on Sunday with beautiful sunny skies, 16 the high on Monday, and then back to 9 degrees on a Tuesday with a chance of rain. So there we go. We're kind of seeing some rain, we're seeing some snow, we're seeing some wind. It's springtime, what can I say? 9 degrees, the average high for this time of year, -4, the average low. 27 was our high temperature back in 2004. And in 1954, -17 was where the city was at with the coldest day on record there. 7:13 is when the sun rose this morning. 7:59, just before 8 o'clock, is when our sun is setting this evening. Loving those long hours of daylight in the evenings. 12 degrees the high in Victoria tomorrow with sunny skies. 11 degrees the high in Vancouver. Vancouver could also see some showers later on tomorrow. 7 degrees in Edmonton tomorrow. Calgary possibly seeing some showers. Could see a thunderstorm sometime tomorrow afternoon as well. Winds not quite as high as they will be in Lethbridge tomorrow. 4 degrees the high in Saskatoon. 10 the high in Regina with partly cloudy skies there. Increasing clouds throughout the day. -1 the high tomorrow in Winnipeg with beautiful sunny skies there as well. As we look further east into central Canada, seeing a lot of precipitation in this portion of the country. Toronto, rather, 17 the high there. Rain. Ottawa expecting to see some thunderstorms tomorrow afternoon. Rain showers. 12 degrees the high. 10 degrees the high in Montreal with some rain as well. As we look to the Maritimes, Fredericton seeing a possibility of some flurries and showers. 4 degrees the high. Same thing for Halifax. 4 the high, rain showers there. Mix of sun and cloud in Charlottetown, 4 degrees. And 5 degrees the high in St. John's, Newfoundland with showers there expected as well. So there you have it. That is your forecast. Air Canada's outlook for 2022 says its capacity will be up about 150% compared with last year, but it says that it will still leave it at only about 75% of its pre-pandemic level of capacity as measured by available seat miles. The Montreal-based airline says it also expects its adjusted cost per available seat mile to be 13 to 15% higher than in 2019. CEO Michael Rousseau says Air Canada has put a strategy in place to return to profitability as the pandemic is receding and travel is returning. Dollarama announced it's raising its quarterly dividend as it reported fourth quarter profits were up 26.5% from the year earlier. The retailer says its profit jumped to $22 million as sales increased to $1.22 billion from $1.1 billion in the same quarter last year. Dollarama says sales were helped by the opening of 24 new stores and a 5.7% uptick in comparable store sales and value. It says it will now pay a quarterly dividend of 5.53 cents per share, up from 5.0 cents per share. Now here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was down 11 points to 22,075. The Dow was down 65 points to 35,228. The S&P 500 was down 29 points to 4,602. The Nasdaq was down 177 points to 14,442. West Texas Intermediate oil was up $3.58 to $107.82 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 28 cents to $5.61 US. Gold was down 5 cents to $1,932.82 US an ounce. Silver was down 3 cents to $24.85 US an ounce. Feed wheat is $13.47 per bushel, barley is $9.69, canola is $25.24, corn is $11.66 per bushel. Live cattle were down 73 cents to $140.18. Feeder cattle were down 73 cents to $155.98. Lean hogs were down $1.53 to $104.53. The Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at 80.12 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is in BC for meetings with leaders of the Williams Lake First Nation who believe the bodies of children are buried near a former residential school. Trudeau told a gathering that he was moved by their welcome and wanted to convey the message that all of Canada grieves with the community. He says he went there to seek reconciliation. The Williams Lake First Nation announced in January that a preliminary investigation had found 93, quote, reflections that could indicate children buried around the site of the former St. Joseph's Mission Residential School. Up next, I chat with our legislative reporter about the province's reaction to the federal government's climate plan. And Jason Kenney condemns the April 1st carbon tax and introduces a motion to counter it for Albertans. Keep it right here.
Here's today's Bridge City News community calendar. Come out for some family fun at Easter at the Galt, taking place Saturday, April 16th from 10 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Enjoy exciting performances by Lethbridge's Troyanda Ukrainian Dance Club. Challenge your family to an epic egg battle and explore the Galt as you hunt for Easter eggs. Cost for admission is $6 per person and free for annual pass holders. Spots are limited, so book early by going to galtmuseum.com. Discover unique gifts and support local art and culture. The Lethbridge Handmade Market is taking place Saturday, April 23rd at Exhibition Park from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Over 85 handmade artisans will be displaying their beautiful creations. Plus, enjoy delicious treats from local food trucks, door prizes, a community painting project, and kids can participate in a scavenger hunt. Parking is free and admission is $5 per person. Kids 14 and under can enter for free. For more information, visit lethbridgehandmademarket.ca. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
So much happening in our province this week in the world of politics. We got our premier connecting himself to the Oscars. We're going to talk about that, as well as the feds coming out with their climate plan. Here to discuss it and break it all down is our legislative reporter and correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson. Tyler, thanks so much for joining me today. Great to have you on.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So Tyler, lots going on. As we all know by now, there have been changes made to the way the United Conservatives are holding Jason Kenney's leadership review with the switch to mail-in ballot instead of in-person voting in Red Deer, where some 15,000 people were already registered?
That's right. Yeah, they'd expected considerably fewer than that. And sort of by the cutoff date of March 19th to buy party memberships, they had about 15,000 people register and had expected, another 5,000 or 10,000 more to register to come down to Red Deer. So basically, the party's line is that it was, unwieldy to be able to hold an in-person voting day in Red Deer in the facility they had rented, because of course it all would have been done with paper and pencil, and people would have had to count out the ballots at the end of the day. So they basically said, look, this is just not doable, and so they've moved to mail-in ballots, which will go to every member of the United Conservatives, not just those who registered for the leadership review. So it's about 55,000 is what I've heard. And then there'll be ID requirements and a return mailing envelope and all these things to get the votes back into an auditing firm, which is going to handle all that. So the big thing that's happening here is that no longer will we know the results on April 9th as we would have if it had been done in person. So it'll now be like May 18th, I think, when we finally find out whether or not Jason Kenney is going to stick around as the leader of the party. And this change, of course, has been hugely controversial, with Kenney critics saying that this is, moving the goalposts, changing the game to benefit Jason Kenney. Kenney's people saying that, no, this is a logistical matter. So, even if the news was announced a week or so ago, it is certainly going to be a topic of conversation among partisan conservatives in this province for a few more weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Way to stretch it out, too. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Now, Tyler, there have been some reports that Kenney has privately alluded to the fact that he could just give up his spot as premier and retire to a private life. Do you think that this is really something he would do?
No, I don't really think so. There was some chatter that he'd had some of these conversations around Christmas time, sort of hashing out what might happen, if he decided to step back from being premier and step back from politics. But he has said that, look, I could quit politics tomorrow, and I'd have my evenings back, I'd have my weekends back, and all this stuff. But in this recording that was leaked to media, CBC broke the story. He basically said that the attempt to oust him as leader was sort of from these fringe lunatics, and that the UCP is a mainstream conservative party, and he wasn't going to give up the fight and let sort of this fringe take over the party. So that is, he's hinted at that a little bit. In some of his sort of public comments, obviously talking about there being fringe elements of the party that supported convoy protests and things like that, whereas his government was sort of trying to knot and thread that needle. So, but it's still very interesting that he would have come out and said that to staff, sort of casting it as a fringe versus mainstream sort of battle. So it'll be interesting to see what reporting comes out in the next few weeks as ballots are counted and this thing keeps going on.
Very interesting indeed. Okay, let's turn our attention a little bit to federal politics here. So the federal government comes out with their climate plan on Tuesday. A very ambitious plan, I might add. It estimates that the oil and gas sector will need to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 42% by the year 2030 in order for the country to reach its climate targets. But this plan is being criticized.
It is, and nothing creates unity in Alberta politics like the Prime Minister's government doing something. So that's what we saw on Tuesday. We had both the New Democrats and the United Conservatives sort of slamming this plan. Jason Nixon, who's the Environment Minister, came out and said that this plan is insane. It's a direct attack on the oil and gas sector. And Rachel Notley, took a similar path. She said this is fantasy and it's aspirational. It's not a roadmap to actually get this done. So pretty poor reviews for the federal government's climate change plan from Alberta politicians. And I guess we'll see what happens with that. Obviously, at this particular moment with the war in Ukraine, sort of Alberta's oil and gas products are sort of popular, maybe more popular than they have been in previous years, and the government's really trying to capitalize on that. So it's very interesting timing, I think, for the federal Liberals to come out with this climate plan when there's all this other stuff going on in Alberta politics.
Yeah, no kidding. And like I said before, ambitious. I mean, it includes a schedule to shift to electric vehicles, promising that 1 in 5 new passenger cars is going to be battery operated within 4 years. Are people just kind of thinking this is unrealistic?
I think that's probably the case for some things. I mean, taking a look, for example, at the oil and gas sector needing to cut emissions by 42%, as you mentioned. I mean, the oil and gas sector makes up for something like 26% of Canada's overall emissions. So, that's talking pretty big cuts. And it takes time to switch over infrastructure and these sorts of things. And that's sort of what Rachel Notley was alluding to, saying that, this is maybe a doable objective, but, on the sort of timelines we're talking about, the costs of these things, it might not be possible. But yeah, I mean, on the electric vehicles thing, it'll be interesting to see what happens on car lots in the next couple of years. That's for sure. Maybe everyone will be driving electric F-150s in a year or two. Who knows?
I don't know about that, but yeah, wouldn't that be interesting to see? Let's switch gears here one more time. So this is something everyone's been talking about this week. It's the slap heard around the world, of course. Will Smith hitting Chris Rock on stage at the Oscars. And apparently, Alberta Premier Jason Kenney got in on this. So what's that all about, Tyler?
Yeah, so people may have seen the meme sort of going around that shows Chris Rock being slapped and Will Smith with sort of his hand blurring through the air towards him. And Jason Kenney was like really quick out the gate, or at least his people were, because they posted a meme on his Instagram account at about midnight, the night of the Oscars. And it was labeled, Chris Rock was labeled green energy policies and Will Smith was labeled reality. And so that was sort of noticed first thing the next morning by reporters, and Kenney was asked about it. And he's standing by it, saying, it was a modern communications tool to make the point that he thinks green energy policies have failed. And of course, his critics saying that this is, sort of a tacit endorsement of violence, perhaps. So, a little bit of an Alberta angle there to the slap, as you say, that was heard around the world.
Okay, so Tyler, this week the UCP has introduced a bill that will overhaul the oversight process for continuing care services. So what they're doing, I guess, is creating one bill that will replace 6 pieces of legislation, some of which date back way to the 80s. So maybe talk a little bit more about this, Tyler.
That's right. Yeah. So obviously, continuing care and palliative care and, this whole sort of umbrella of care services for elderly people have been very much under the spotlight in the last couple of years because of the pandemic. And as you mentioned, as it turns out, this system is sort of regulated by 6 pieces of legislation and 6 sets of regulations. So it's pretty disconnected, I suppose you could say, set of rules around these facilities. And a report had been done last year looking into the system overall and what could be changed. And it made a number of recommendations, and the government has sort of adopted those recommendations. And so this step, this sort of overhauling of the legislative structure and the oversight structure and the accountability structure is sort of part of that process. And, it's actually another small example of bipartisan sort of unity in the legislature, because the New Democrats are essentially on board with the idea of overhauling this. Now, their concern is that this doesn't do enough for workers and working conditions and things like that, which is, of course, part of this, larger issue in continuing care homes. But it'll be very interesting to watch how that folds out. And, I should mention that, even before the pandemic, this was a thing that was a major topic of conversation in parts of Canada. Ontario, for example, prior to the pandemic, went through a big sort of soul searching, I guess you could say, about elder care and had looked at reforming their system. So, pandemic or no pandemic, I think it's probably fair to say that this is a long overdue look at the way that elderly Albertans are taken care of.
Mm-hmm. And my understanding that it's going to increase fines as well.
Yeah, so it'll basically increase fines, maybe up to $100,000 for operators who violate these rules. That number is sticking in my mind here. So yeah, there's sort of there's the regulatory part of it, but then also the accountability part of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Tyler, the carbon tax is set to go up by 3 cents on April 1st, but Jason Kenney introduced a motion in the legislature this week condemning the hike.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say I think it's going to do anything. The Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, is probably not going to back down because the Alberta government is upset about the carbon tax hike, as it has been since it was elected. But it's a notable thing because in the context of everything going on with Kenney's leadership, in the context with his sort of relatively low approval numbers, both within the party and outside the party, he does need to sort of have a few sort of red meat policies for his base or gestures for the party base to remind them that he is still a conservative and is still on their side. So I think you can look at this as part of that. And then the other part of it is, of course, that Jason Kenney is philosophically opposed to carbon taxes, and so is his government. So that is happening. And then the other thing that is sort of happening in context here is that April 1st, when the carbon tax increase comes into play, bringing it up to, I think, 12 cents a litre. That's the same day that the Alberta government will be dropping the fuel tax for diesel and gasoline. So that should bring a little bit of relief at the pumps. They announced that maybe 3 weeks ago now. So essentially, the way the government is framing this is, we campaigned on canceling the carbon tax, and by eliminating the fuel tax, we're, sort of balancing out the carbon tax in that way. Yeah. So,
it's like just
it'll
kidding.
Certainly, yeah, exactly. So it'll take that out of it. Of course, we'll have to see what happens with prices that are, totally outside of the government's control.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting that it's April 1st, too. Aren't they calling it an April Fool's joke or something?
Yes, that is what Kenney called it in his announcement of the motion, an April Fool's prank, he said.
There you go. All right. So, Tyler, Alberta will establish an office to combat human trafficking. So this is one of multiple recommendations from a task force that the UCP is moving ahead with. Can you maybe talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, so this task force was, it was headed by Paul Brandt, the country music star, who's done a lot of advocacy around human trafficking, and they'd sort of been looking into the incidents in Alberta and the sort of government structure around it, the policing structure, that sort of thing. And the panel reported back over the weekend, I believe it was, with I think it was 18 or 19 recommendations, and sort of the main groupings are that to create an office of human trafficking, to have sort of messaging and education programs that are universally standardized, have better data collection across the province. Things like that. Tyler Shandro, the Justice Minister, formerly the Health Minister, of course, that also changed a few weeks ago, basically saying that, this is a well-hidden crime in Canada and in Alberta. And the police say there's about 31 incidents of human trafficking in 2019 is what their statistics are. So perhaps that is very high, perhaps that is very low. I mean, I suppose it would depend what you compare it to in terms of other crimes. So that sort of the panel's recommendations. The government has accepted them in principle, as they sort of tend to do. Now, the one they didn't accept was a recommendation to change Alberta to an opt-out organ donation system. So, instead of signing up to be an organ donor, everyone would be signed up to be an organ donor, but you could opt out. And they sort of rejected that, saying that, and the idea behind this was to try and make Alberta not a destination for organ trafficking, which sort of doesn't seem to be all that big of an issue, is basically where it comes down on that one. And I think also probably the UCP would have a little political hurdle perhaps on that one, because Conservative governments tend to be a bit skeptical of opt-out organ donation.
Ugh, there you go. Okay, so let's looking at Edmonton here. So Thomas Dang, elected as an Edmonton New Democrat, is under investigation for allegedly hacking into the government's vaccine records. So Tyler, what's happening with that?
So this was an announcement maybe a month or two ago now that Dang was under RCMP investigation for hacking, essentially, and accessing personal health records. And I don't believe he's been in court yet on it, but he posted on his website a week or so ago this sort of big document outlining what he did and why he did it. And essentially he was arguing that he did it he'd heard that there were security issues with the government's COVID-19 vaccine record system. And so he'd sort of plugged in, I believe it was Jason Kenney's birthday to try and, prove whether or not this issue that he'd heard about was true. And as it happened, he ended up getting someone else's COVID-19 records, not Jason Kenney's. And so he basically had argued, this was what's called white hat hacking. Not hacking for any nefarious reasons, but to sort of show this IT issue. And of course, the UCP have condemned him for that. But a couple IT security experts over the week or so have basically said, look, there clearly was an IT issue here, and maybe the government should take that a little more seriously. So that's kind of the two sides of what's going on with that one.
Mm-hmm. So, Tyler, there's been a little bit of pushback on, it looks like the government's scrapping a controversial plan to make people pay a $150 fine within a week to fight a traffic fine, basically. So if they get a traffic ticket, they can pay a $150 fine. So what is with the pushback to this?
Yeah, so the system basically was condemned as sort of a runaround on the justice system. So you get a ticket in the mail, or you get pulled over and get a ticket. You would have 1 week to pay a $150 fee, and then you would go to the sort of online adjudicator to argue over your ticket, as opposed to sort of traffic court and all those other things. And so the idea was basically to free up court and police resources for other more serious matters. And there was like a really, really substantial blowback to it, with people saying, look, this is an access to justice issue. Why should people be having to pay to fight a ticket that they've been given, and so on and so forth. So the government has actually backed down on that. And the NDP basically calling it a victory for drivers, saying that, this was an access to justice issue that has since sort of been rectified. So, we've talked a lot about like the coal policy that the Alberta government suddenly changed a year or so ago. And this and had this like massive unintended blowback. And this was, I think, another one of those that just they went ahead with it, and just people were shocked, and they've now had to backtrack a little bit.
Wow, lots happening, of course, as we said before. Tyler, we are out of time, but thanks so much for joining us once again today.
Thanks for having me.
The war in Ukraine is having a huge impact on everyday families living there, and also on other nations. What's happening on the ground? How is the Ukrainian church responding to all of this? We're joined today by Anya Popham, a Canadian-Ukrainian citizen who has lived in Medicine Hat, Alberta since her family immigrated there in 1990 from Ukraine. She and her husband Dan are involved in missions, and Anya has spent a number of years doing missions work in Ukraine as well as in Russia, so she brings a very unique perspective today. Welcome to Bridge City News, Anya. So great to have you on.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Anya, can you please share with us a bit about your background and your connection to Ukraine? Obviously, you are from there.
Thank you, Janet. Yes. Again, thank you for inviting me. It's been a very emotional and yet very faith-building journey. Yeah, actually, since, I guess that was February 24th, when the war started, and I received this text from my cousins, basically saying, "Pray for us. They're shooting our houses, or we're here. These shootings and shelling is happening, and yeah, I just did not know exactly how to respond to this, except that my husband and I started praying immediately, and every second day I fasted and prayed because nothing else gave me peace, and when I would fast and pray, the Lord just supernaturally gave me his peace, and I'm very grateful for that. And in times of turmoil, I do that, and his peace is there. So but I just wanted to say that in 1989, actually, on June 17th, my parents made the biggest sacrifice. They packed our family of 9 children, and my mom was expecting her 10th. She was about 8 months pregnant, and they left the city of Ismail, Ukraine, USSR at the time, and departed. We traveled by boat on the River Danube, and we came to Austria in 1990. So we had to wait a whole year before we came and arrived in Canada. And a church in Bow Island, a New Life Fellowship Church in Bow Island, with Roy Weir and Marilyn Strom and Pastor Bailey, amazing people, sponsored their family, and we will be grateful to them forever.
So I would imagine you have still a lot of friends and connections there, possibly even family. What are you hearing from your connections in Ukraine right now with the war happening? What is daily life like for those who are staying behind right now?
Yes, I do have many friends, amazing friends. There are cousins, first cousins, second cousins that I have in Ukraine who, again, I communicate with them daily, sometimes hourly. In the first week of the war, let's say from, February 24th, pretty much until the middle of March, I was just regularly checking my, text messages to make sure that they're alive. And people were asking, are they safe? No one is safe there, even now. It's very difficult, but they're alive. Praise the Lord. And they, many of them were able to get out. So they're refugees right now. Some of them are in Poland. Some of them are in Germany right now. And some of them would like to come to Canada. Some decided to stay. And the reason they're staying is because this one cousin of mine, she was writing to me, and she said, please don't judge us because we decided to stay. It's very difficult, but there's nobody else to help the elderly, to help the people with special needs, And one of the texts that she sent me, I actually translated this into English, just a couple sentences here. She said, actually, this came on March 1st. So she says, it is extremely difficult to love our enemies during these difficult times. At the moment, I'm struggling greatly within my own soul, and I don't even know how to pray because the victory of the Ukrainian army means lives lost of the Russian soldiers. The advancement of the Russian army means death of my friends, relatives, and acquaintances. Yesterday, after another artillery attack, 3 children were killed in our city. So this is still March 1st. And the whole school was burned to the ground, in which we're witnessing, in the school, they were witnessing about the Lord to the students, back some years ago. And so my cousin says, I'm just sitting here and weeping, dealing with this internal conflict and struggle.
That must be so difficult, especially from that spiritual perspective, because it's true. We're told to love our enemies, but then you've got enemies advancing on you. So I do have a question for you. How is the church over there responding to the Russian soldiers who are invading?
Yeah. So I don't know if people know this or not, but Ukraine is one of the most missionary sending nations in Europe. And especially since the Soviet Union fell, They many missionaries came in and they established different theological seminaries and different mission schools, many different humanitarian aid, services since 1990. So actually, my own uncle is a missionary to Russia, and he's a Ukrainian missionary to Russia. A very good friend of my father's. My father was a pastor in Ukraine, and his very best friend is also in the unreached people's groups right now, serving in Russia. So Ukrainian people, they, especially the believers, they don't want to see Russians as the enemies. And I mean, but the thing is, what do you do when let's say somebody comes into your home and they say, this is our place now, get out, or I'll do as I please. So it's very difficult. And from what I know, the churches are united much more than they were before, and I'm so grateful for that. And that's one of my prayers, is that these struggles would make them stronger.
Yeah, I'm just curious, what is the day to day like right now for them? I mean, are people still going to work? Are schools still teaching students? Are churches still meeting? Is it just too dangerous to do this? Are people getting food and water? What's it like?
Yeah. So today is day number 34 of the war, and today, it really depends on the region. It depends on where the war is happening. It's, as far as I know, they still go to school, they still go to work. Especially people who are in the medical field, for them it's 24/7. So there are some people that really find it difficult to get out. Another cousin of mine, she was in a village for 14 days. She was not able to. She didn't have power.
But I can't imagine having no power for 14 days. I mean, as we know, Ukraine is right in the middle of the winter right there. It's the winter season there, so to not have power for 2 weeks is kind of unthinkable, really.
The eastern part of really has it hard. The western part of Ukraine, they're the ones that are trying to help as much as possible. So after 14 days, my cousin was able to get out, and again, that's a miracle. That they were not killed, because it was just hard to leave the city that was surrounded by tanks.
Absolutely. For viewers watching this, how can viewers help practically, or how can we pray for Ukraine? What can we do to help?
I would like to encourage people to pray and not to give up hope. It is so easy and to quickly give up. And in our society, we just want something new and something more exciting. But to withstand the struggle, and to keep praying, it takes endurance. It takes courage. So people can pray, pray for the soldiers on both sides. That they. I know maybe it's wishful thinking, but with prayer it's possible. The Lord does do wonders. Where Russian soldiers come to the Lord, and the Ukrainian soldiers can and do show amazing hospitality. For those that don't fight anymore. It's difficult to approach a person that's fighting, right? So pray for that. Pray for the Church of Ukraine. If possible, there's so many helpful links to give help, financially. But I actually was listening to one of the pastors who is at the Ukrainian-Polish border, and he said one of our biggest needs right now are people. People who can come, who can either speak the language or provide humanitarian aid, because most of these are women and children who left because their men have stayed behind, right? People 18 to 60, men 18 to 60 cannot leave Ukraine. So they are in need, of so much support. Many of them have experienced trauma, and that's something one of my cousins said, is that, She said, I have a 13-year-old daughter. When I hear this bombing happening, she said, all I want to do is just fall to the floor and cry. And I don't do this because of my daughter. I don't want her to see this. So, my husband and I prayed for her many times, and we still are praying for her family. But yeah, pray that the war would end. But more than anything, pray that God's purposes will be accomplished. Because, even if the war ends, there's so many unresolved things at this point. And, Russians have their own view, Ukrainians have their own view, but the Lord is accomplishing his purpose in this time.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Anya. Looks like we are out of time, but thank you so much for sharing your stories there. Anya Popham is a former missionary to Ukraine and Russia with relatives and friends who still remain in the war-torn country. Great to have you on today.
Thank you.
I'm Jeanette Roche. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.